Yay. Hi, Lisa. This is Lisa Olivera, everyone. She is a therapist, a writer, a creative, a human, a mother. And we were just talking about a mirror. And she lives in Petaluma, California. And she just came out with this really amazing book called Already Enough, a path to self-acceptance. Sorry, I should look at it when but anyway, Lisa, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be speaking with you today, and to have you talk a little bit about the path to self-acceptance, or at least your path, and offer suggestions on maybe how we can kind of look at the stories we've been telling ourselves, see how they shape who we are, and maybe think about ways that maybe we could write them in a more nourishing or helpful way. So thanks for coming and talking about your book.
Thank you for having me. I feel like your art does that too. I feel like it's kind of mirrors to us our humanity and mirrors to us our, so many of the things that I think we grapple with in private. So thank you as well.
But it's weird. I think when I started the book, I was like, oh my gosh, this I understand why people love this. It's like being told the things that you know are true and okay, but you tell yourself, you spend the entire day telling yourself are wrong and stupid and dumb, but yet acknowledging them somehow, like for me at least, it helps me get past them and not have those sort of shameful, you said, I think at some point, the blooming of shame kind of from these negative thoughts that can sometimes happen. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about we didn't talk about this in the IG Live, but the structure of the book, or how, because it's divided up into 3 sections.
Yeah. So the first section is called Getting Honest, which I think is what we do when we choose to look at what's happening within us in a real and honest and genuine way. And I think that's what looking at the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories we formed based on our lived experiences allow us to do, is to pay attention to what's there and to start asking questions about what we're holding about ourselves and about the ways that we're treating ourselves or the things we think about ourselves, and not, oh no,
can we pause when finish your thought?
Yeah.
I order you to finish your thought, but after that, can we briefly take a side tangent to share kind of your story, or a story that sort of was really influential in informing sort of negative thought patterns about self-worth?
Yeah. So I was abandoned when I was born, and I was adopted, and not knowing where I came from was really like a big place that a lot of my stories grew from. And it wasn't until I slowed down enough to notice that experience had allowed me to cultivate certain beliefs about myself that I was able to see how much that story was showing up in my life and how it was impacting me in so many really painful ways. And I think that's the power of slowing down to look at those stories, because we can then understand perhaps that some of them aren't actually true, but that they made sense based on the things we've experienced and based on why we may have developed them.
Another sort of example of that, for me seems, or this sort of thread that is sort of following me at the moment, is the idea of perfectionism, how this sort of like unworthiness breeds this need to be perfect or earned sort of merit, which I think can be really destructive, having your sort of self-worth be bent on external factors that you can't necessarily control. And that sort of leads me, I feel like that's a tangent from the sort of self-acceptance.
Yeah.
Radical or self-compassion. We were talking about Kristen Neff earlier, I think, right?
Yeah. And perfectionism is such a big thing that I think so many people struggle with. And I think at the root of it is a lot of stuff about worthiness and enoughness. And self-compassion is one of the things I talk about in the book as just something we can practice with ourselves to slowly unravel from those harsh narratives that we often hold, and to slowly open ourselves up to a new way of being with ourselves and a new way of approaching ourselves. And that can feel hard sometimes when we're not used to speaking to ourselves, or holding or taking care of ourselves in that way. But I think when we think of it as a practice and something to slowly implement over time, it becomes a lot more doable, and it becomes a resource for us to tap into when those harsh narratives are coming up again, or when we're just questioning who we are, or questioning our worth, or feeling like we're not perfect enough, or whatever it may be.
The other sort of, I think, term that I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about in conjunction with self-compassion was, could you define a little bit, or when you use the term radical acceptance, I just wanted to pause there a little bit on what that actually means.
Yeah. A lot of people think acceptance means being okay with everything that has happened, but I think of it as being with what is, as we are, and being with ourselves as we are, and choosing to meet ourselves where we are. And it doesn't mean approving of, or liking, or embracing, or feeling good about even, but more so, can we choose to accept what is, and choose to be with ourselves in the messy place that we might find ourselves, and then ask ourselves what we need next. And I think there's something really freeing about that, because it doesn't require us to change before we can practice accepting who we are, accepting where we are, and knowing that acceptance also doesn't mean that we can't, or shouldn't, or don't want to shift and change and transform, that we can do both. And I think acceptance actually creates like a really soft landing place for us to come back to when we are trying to move into new places.
I think that that's a really tricky balancing act. For some reason, those two truths, like the acceptance and shifting happening simultaneously, is really difficult for me to comprehend.
I think it's difficult for most people to comprehend, because we're so often taught that things are either this or that it's either one thing or the other thing, when often I think in life there can be things that are both and I think acceptance and growth is one of them. And I think acceptance is something that a lot of people see as sort of like opposite of growth, or a
Yeah.
stuckness.
Yeah.
When I think of it's actually a propellant towards growth, from what I've experienced and just from what I've seen.
Another sort of, I don't know if you'd call this duality or binary, seeming binary, that I feel like is a theme throughout the book, is this sort of comparison between messy, or this holding of messy and beautiful at the same time. And I feel like, what I was wondering if, could you talk about those two in contrast to each other, and how they also can exist simultaneously?
Yeah, I think it's most powerful to think about that in ourselves as humans, and how we will always be imperfect, and we will always be messy and not put together and not have it all figured out. And we will always be, just kind of, I'm trying to think of another word to explain it. I guess just, we'll always be flawed and not cohesive, and not tidy. But there's also something really beautiful about not needing to be those things in order to live a life that we want to live, or in order to honor who we are, or embrace the messy parts of us, as well as embracing the beautiful parts of us. I think we wouldn't understand beauty and goodness and all of those like lovely qualities if we didn't have that contrast to relate to. And I find that so often we feel like we have to get rid of our messy selves in order to be beautiful or whole or good. Yeah. And not as in like appearance, but just as in like a felt sense of beautiful as humans. But I think there's something powerful about honoring the messiness as part of what makes us beautiful, part of what makes us whole, part of what makes us human, which I think will always comprise of both of those things.
I think for me, I've never thought about them, or I don't know if maybe this is not true. I think as a person who's been trained in sort of the study of visual aesthetics and I guess, conceptual art, messy and beautiful can absolutely coexist. So that one for me is a little bit easier to see the sort of like alignment of the two simultaneously, more so than the sort of acceptance and growth mindset. But I was kind of wondering, as you were talking, if how what you see in the sort of what you see or what you sense, I guess is a better word, is going on in sort of our cultural or collective mindset shifting at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, so many things, but I think especially in the sort of wellness self-help world, I think there's starting to be a lot more emphasis on embracing who we are and not needing to be perfect. I think those messages are kind of coming across more in a lot of different ways. And I think so much of the reason that's happening is because so many of us are deeply unhappy and unsatisfied, even when we are successful or when we get to certain points in our lives or when we acquire certain things, which is so often what we're taught will make us feel whole and complete.
Well, it does
And
for
I
like
think,
30 seconds.
what was that?
It does for like 30 seconds.
Right, exactly. Like momentary, yes. But long term,
Momentary enoughness.
totally. But yeah, long term, it still leaves us feeling empty. And I think a lot of people are starting to realize, like, oh, a lot of these messages we've been taught by these systems that we're in don't actually work for our humanity and don't actually allow us to show up fully for ourselves or in our lives. So I think there's just, yeah, a questioning of some of the
I
things that
feel
we've
that
been
too.
taught. Mhm.
I want to, could you talk a little bit about this? I think in the book you use the term wholeness, um, and what wholeness kind of looks like, or how, because that also I think is like a being shifted. The definition of what that means is shifting in a in a way at this moment.
Yeah, yeah. From my perspective, I see wholeness as just the whole of who we are, all of who we are, all parts of who we are. And I think when we honor all parts of who we are, including the stuff we don't like, including the stuff that maybe we wish wasn't there, we are in essence honoring our humanity and honoring just the, yeah, like the bigness of who we are as people. I think that can so often get cut off when we cut parts of ourselves off, and that can feel kind of disorganized or unattached when we don't allow ourselves to embrace all of it and to be with all of it. So I think wholeness is, again, kind of like this inherent experience of being a person, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it makes sense to me, but I'm really attracted to sort of the spectrum of experience, and I always have been.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's a little, for me, it feels like it makes sense that the entire experience of being human would be encapsulated by the term wholeness, if I'm summarizing that correctly.
Completely. Yeah.
But I kind of going back to, sorry, this was like a very long tangent to going back to the structure of your book, because we don't have too much more time, but kind of, can you talk about maybe how to notice or sort of start to untangle what the stories that we've been telling ourselves, what they are?
Yeah. I always think starting with asking questions is really potent, and it sounds so simple, but I think it can invite us to start seeing things in a different way and start exploring things from a fresh perspective that we may not have explored from before. So I think starting by just asking even basic questions like, yeah, what stories do I tell myself often? Or what stories do hold me back from showing up fully? Or how have I been impacted by the things that have happened to me? And how have they shaped how I feel about myself? And even trying to ask those questions from a place of curiosity, which is another thing I talk about, is gives us room to start seeing what else could be possible. And there are so many more ways to do that, but I think that's kind of the quickest answer is to just start giving yourself permission to ask new questions and to open yourself up to new ways of seeing the things that you hold.
So a practice that I think we both, I'm not assuming you do this, but I'm going to assume you do this. We both, I think, use Brene Brown's "The story I'm telling myself right now is" before like lots of sentences.
Yeah,
But it really feels like is it is helpful for me to sort of distance myself from sometimes these sort of like negative refrains that I find myself in the sort of cycle of repeat.
totally. And it's something that we talk a lot about in narrative therapy is separating yourself from the problem. So I am not the story that I tell myself. The story I tell myself is something that I'm experiencing. And even when you can separate yourself a little bit, you give yourself room to look at it from a new lens and a new perspective, which can invite a new experience.
Something, this is like a personal question that maybe I shouldn't ask, but I was wondering if, and I don't know if you talk about this in the book, I don't know if I remember you did, but about how sort of automatic thought, if you could talk a little bit about automatic thoughts and sort of, for me, as I always, a value of mine growing up was being able to share those automatic thoughts when they came up and be accepted with them. But through many years of talking about it, perhaps it's not, I don't know, effective, or sometimes can be hurtful or harmful to other people to share those. And I was wondering, do you have like a stance on this, if that makes sense?
I am a big proponent of the pause, and of slowing down.
Tell me
And
more.
yeah, just, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with sharing what comes up for you automatically, because I think that's a very human thing. And I think so many of us do that all the time. But I think there is something powerful too about sitting with it for a moment and noticing why that might be coming up, and letting yourself be with it for a little bit first in order to be able to parse out what's actually happening for you. Because so often that automatic thought is coming from a place of judgment or criticism or whatever it may be. And it's not always the whole picture, but we can move from that as if it is. So I think there's something powerful about honoring that thought. And sometimes we do share it. And yeah, like giving ourselves a moment to be with it too.
So, Lisa, would you be willing to talk a little bit about, so this newsletter is called Bad at Keeping Secrets. If you have anything, or even just like the idea, what a secret is to you, or anything you want to share today, get off your chest. I don't know where that came from.
I know, that's a funny phrase. Yeah, I think I won't share a specific secret, but I'll more so share something I'm sitting with that I haven't really shared with a lot of people, which is that there's a part of my identity that I think I'm ready to part ways with. And a part of me that has been a pretty big part of me that I feel like may not need or want to continue during this season of my life. And it's a tricky place to be in, because yeah, it's like we can want things and also it not be the right thing for us in the moment. So I'm kind of sitting with this question of identity and yeah, whether or not I want to live out certain roles that I have.
I mean, I think that's hard too, because I feel like, I mean, it's hard to let go of something you've defined yourself, used to define yourself, or a major part of who you are. Can you maybe explore sort of why it is that you're sort of disconnecting with this part of you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I'm just connecting more to other parts of me, and I'm noticing that other parts of me are wanting to take up more space and wanting to be tended to and utilized and tapped into more in ways that I'm not sure can happen if I'm still really tethered to this part of my identity that I'm kind of not sure I want to be tethered to in the way that I am anymore.
It's weird. I don't know why do you think you feel like you have a sort of pressure, or if there's a tension to kind of keep with this part of you, even though you've acknowledged that there are other parts that you kind of are more interested in or inspired by at this moment?
I think exactly what you said about becoming really identified and known with really big roles that we fill and that we've filled for a lot of time. It can feel scary, I think, to let ourselves let go of things that other people might not understand why we're letting go of, or that might mean we'll be perceived differently or seen differently or not taken as seriously or whatever it may be. And I think it's about like, yeah, listening to ourselves and noticing some of those fears that come up and asking if the fear that we have is worth holding for the outcome that we'll receive by moving through it. Yeah.
I love that. Asking if the fear is worth the outcome. Wait, say that. Will you say that again?
Yeah.
Sorry, I
Like
want to use this in my life.
yeah. It's like, can we ask ourselves if the fear that we are feeling is worth moving through for the thing that we are wanting on the other side of it?
I feel some shame around admitting this right now, but I think that the theme for me as I get older is that I think in my youth, I thought there was time. And I understand time is a huge privilege to be able to feel like, oh, I'll just do that later, or I'll be able to be this at a different time. And especially in the past like 5 years, it's really been the sort of pivoting point of realizing that I can't be everything and having to choose the things that are most important with the time I have left, which again, it's very difficult. I'm feeling a lot of like pushback on saying this as it being like to the right audience, or this might resonate with some audiences, but also might feel, I don't know how I'm fearing being perceived at the moment. But I feel like this is also this for me ties into what you're saying about like, how do you have only this finite amount of, it feels like I have a finite amount of attention and space. And for me, I don't know how, it's difficult to choose what to let go of.
Yeah. Yeah.
I realize that I just can't do it all.
Yeah. And sometimes we have to let go of things that we enjoy in order to make more room for the things that are actually aligned for us at whatever season we're in our lives.
Oh, I really want you to talk a bit about alignment as another thing that I've been kind of obsessed with lately. Like I'll use it. I've found myself using it in statements like if friendships, for example, if you're like, oh, we're just not aligned right now. Like, can you talk about what you mean by sort of aligned action? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I feel like this is like a really important concept that I, for some reason, wasn't aware of until shockingly recently.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's something most people talk about. So you're not alone in that. But I think it's about meeting ourselves where we are, even energetically, and allowing that to factor into the choices we make, which doesn't always require us to like not want or not like something, but more so like, is there space for this in the season I'm in and in the moment that I'm in, or in the place in my life that I'm in right now? And sometimes there isn't for a variety of reasons. And it's not always because we don't want it or because it's not good or because we don't like it, but sometimes it's out of alignment with the energy that we have to give, or out of alignment with the values we're wanting to live through right now, or not conducive to what we're wanting to spend our time on right now. And I feel like thinking of things in terms of alignment is, it just feels more gentle and open, and not so rigid and judgmental.
It also takes away blame.
Completely. And and I think takes away just this need to like, put judgment or labels or blame or those kinds of energies onto things, which aren't always actually involved in the reason we do certain things.
It's like all of these tools of judging things, judging through understanding and then subsequently making meaning from, I could see how they functioned in the past but now it's difficult, and sort of like the moment we're in, both from like a biological standpoint and from like a cultural standpoint, how the idea of shame and blame aren't necessary, maybe, or they aren't tools that are producing the sort of needs that we long for anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think circling back to something you said earlier, it's like they might feel good or feel like they're working in the moment, but long term, I don't think they actually produce the kind of change or the kind of spaces or relationships that we're actually wanting.
There was, you had talked about, or like going back to the very beginning of your story, I wanted to ask you, for me, as growing up, the story I was telling myself was that would always imagine the worst case scenario as like this coping mechanism, that I would be prepared if indeed it was true that I was a failure and worthless. And so I would need to prepare for that, like a survival kit.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you ever thought about these sort of negative thoughts as sort of modalities of coping.
100%. I think all of them are, to be honest. I think if we look deep enough, all of our behaviors and thoughts are serving some sort of function for us and some sort of function for our survival. Even if it feels completely maladaptive and not supportive, I think if you go down layer by layer by layer, you'll see like, oh yeah, that was protecting me from being hurt. That was protecting me from being too seen. That was protecting me from being vulnerable. Like all these things that we're afraid of. And I think that allows us to actually have a lot more compassion for the things that we do that we might not like, or the things we think that we might not want to think. It's like, can I see that as something that's actually supporting me in some way? And that's something that's talked a lot about in internal family systems therapy, which talks about how all the parts of us are serving some sort of function. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, so we're like super out of time. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about how, so this in contrast to sort of like, positive thinking, or like how I have, so my sister and I are sort of like, not, I mean, there are definitely overlapping bits, but I'm sort of like a lean into the sadness, and she's more of a like, let's focus on the positive. And then that will sort of like manifest more positive things. And me, we have sort of like a differing life view. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, I know a lot of like, there's been a lot written recently on like toxic positivity and where that sort of where it's situated in sort of relation to like what you're talking about and already enough.
Yeah. I think positivity is really helpful when it's genuine and when it's natural and when it's an innate response that we have to something. I don't think it's helpful when it's forced or when we feel like that's how we're supposed to feel, but we're not actually feeling that way. Or when we try to use it as a resource while bypassing what's hard or bypassing what's actually happening or bypassing what we're actually moving through. So I think it's about holding both. It's about honoring what's actually happening for us and being with our actual experience and remembering that that's not all there is. And I think we can't really tap into real positivity until we allow ourselves to also be with what is. And when we can embrace what is, I think that natural sense of optimism or hope or whatever it may be comes up more automatically. And it's less like, yeah, I don't know. It feels less, I don't know what the word is.
Maybe not genuine, authentic, but those are problematic terms. But I feel like there's a kernel of what you're describing in both of them, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is it. It's just like more grounded, I guess.
Last thing before I let you go, hope. We didn't talk about hope yet. And hope is a tricky term for me right now. And I feel like though the thing that this book does for me is really offer hope. like there's something inherently tied to acceptance and hope and just making it through the day. And I was wondering if you just had any sort of like, what's your standpoint on hope right now? What's the temperature of, is hope needed? Is it not something you look for? Is it something you feel like? I had my therapist recently said that she's in the business of selling hope. And I thought that was an interesting way of framing it.
Yeah. Similar to earlier, I wish I could remember who said this. I'll email you and let you know. But someone said, I recently heard someone say that hope is a practice. And I think that is really powerful because it's, again, not something I think we have to expect ourselves to feel automatically or to feel in response to things that are hard. But how can we orient ourselves toward it so that we can see what's possible? And I think hope and possibility are like very intertwined for me. I think a lot more about possibility than about hope, because to me, possibility just invites more of what could be, whereas hope is, it can sometimes feel trite to experience it in the midst of something hard. So I think I think that's sort of how I frame hope in my life, is through the lens of possibility. That feels more expansive and less like pressured or contrived for me.
I like that a lot. I also feel like there's something about hope for me that is also connected to inspired or excited, or sort of holding those two together, or like in like that the future could involve joy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lisa, thank you so much for doing this with me. I can't tell you what an honor it is to meet you, and that you made time, even though you have a new baby and a practice and so much going on. Already Enough is out right now. I will put the link to get a copy in the newsletter, obviously. But Lisa, thank you so much for all your work. And everybody should check out this book or Lisa's Instagram, because Lisa's Instagram is pretty much amazing. But we didn't actually get to talk about the last two segments of the book. So cliffhanger here. If you want to know what else is in the book, you have to look up Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so sweet to talk with you.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. You too.